much. Welcome everyone to this very interesting morning. We have a very special speaker here, my good friend Yvonne Chia. She's going to tell us a lot about her experience with regards to transformational leadership and how that translates in terms of being clear about your true north in managing crisis. And we're in a world where the world's going through tremendous crisis result probably in our lifetime. This is the worst crisis that we've witnessed. And so the things she's going to talk about is going to be very, very instructional. And I think I'll stop right here and give the opportunity to move on because we're all waiting to hear Yvonne.
Thank you, Datuk Sri. I believe Datuk Yvonne needs no introduction, but please allow me to introduce her. She is a trailblazer woman in banking and was the first chief executive officer of concurrently guiding and steering 2 banks for a period of 18 months amidst the Asian financial crisis. Datuk Yvonne is also an award-winning senior banker and was named among the 50 businesswomen in the mix in 2013 by Forbes Asia and is a 2-time finalist in the CNBC Asia Business Award. She has been in the ASEAN banking scene with a focus on Malaysia in the last 3 decades, where her record of leadership and value creation has transformed the value of banks that she's led. She is a strong supporter of education and technology and believes in empowering millennials and redefining themselves. She holds strongly to her mantra, surround yourself with the right people makes a difference, leading to high performance outcomes, staying resilient and agile to keep with the changing times. So without further ado, Datuk Yvonne, thank you so much for being here. How are you doing?
Thank you for having me. It's been a privilege to get back to the PEMANDU Associates, the high-thinking, passionate young people. Thank you.
It's great. So I thought we'd jump right into it. You've been described as a high-performer leader, an action-oriented leader, and a leader that's impeccable with the outcomes of the organizations that you have led by your peers and by your ex-colleagues. How did you hone these traits, and what do you value the most?
Thank you, Andrew. I think when on reflection, I must say, I was privileged to have actually gone through, when you go through incidents in life. I had a very comfortable life. My dad was in a small town, a big tauke in his own way. And when he died suddenly, I think that's when I started my real life education. And I picked up myself, and the family obviously moved on. But over time, I saw that when he was going about his businesses, how disciplined he was, how focused he was, and how he actually went about in dealing with his creditors and debtors as well. So you go through it by trial and error, and before I knew it, my experience, my teenhood actually made me very resilient. Over time, I realized I was very ambitious, had ambition, I was resilient, and I realized that the difference would be, I would be the only one who would have made to move the world to the next level in the way the world that I see what is comfortable. Then went to university, and then I was lucky to start with an American bank. The American bank had a lot of opportunities. Though I may have started as an economic research, I managed to move myself to the fundamentals of banking, which is in credit and liability. And before I knew it, I was given stints to go international, earn my stripes, and then came back. That was a 15-year stint. But that 15-year stint also taught me to observe that with a diversity of talent and working with a lot of very smart people, you yourself will step up. And when we step up, when the environment also nurtures it, you will be surprised at the potential that is there. What was interesting, I observed was this. Why is it that some of the technically smart people never really made it to the top? The people who were our leaders and our bosses were people who were able to sweat the big matters, who were able to put things together and connect the dots of what the ecosystem, what the values are, what the goals are, and how to get things implemented. But some smarter and technical smarter people were not leaders. Then it dawned upon me that to move up to leadership, there are other qualities that you need to build up, which is about getting along with people, teamwork, about how do you motivate and inspire, how do you get alignment to the common goals, and how do you execute together, and the right timing, as well as making and leverage on everybody's expertise in a different way. That's where my first taste of leadership traits that I started to be very self-aware. And over the years, I also realized that leadership has to be earned. It's easier said that I'm a team leader, I'm a head of something, but leadership roles will come when people see that you are able to lead even quite naturally as well. I noticed that unless you build trust with the team around you and you have their back all the time, it would be difficult to actually sustain good performance and good leadership. I think over the years, from childhood to working 15 years in the American bank and going later into the domestic scene and managing in a crisis, that's when I realized that I was building character, I was building principles, and that probably paved the way to develop a certain track of my own leadership styles.
How did you feel when you knew you were going to be CEO of RHB Bank? This was the first CEO, female CEO of any commercial bank in Malaysia.
I was 43 then, actually. And I was very lucky because I think when you look through the cycles of many leadership today, you will always come across that an opportunity was given to you, either by the timing that you were in the ecosystem or somebody who actually believed in you. I was lucky then that I had Tan Sri Abdul Rashid Hussain, the founder of RHB Bank and RHB Group, who believed in me. It took a while for us to get to know each other, and when he hired me as the deputy CEO for D&C Bank at that time, and now subsequently named at RHB Bank. In my 1 year with D&C, I probably must have shown some potential that when he nominated my name to be the CEO of RHB Bank, the board supported it. And I was also, I think, when they say you're at the right time at the right place, luck is actually the end product of hard work. I was lucky to have the governor of the central bank and minister of finance at that time to approve my appointment. There were a lot, of course, naysayers, including some women as well. I'm sorry to say, obviously, some of the men, but I was pretty determined and told myself that I must have arrived to marry. Depends on to what extent of the depth of the marriage you want to define it. But I knew that I arrived to marriage, and I was comfortable because I had the support of the chairman and the board. And obviously the people that matters, which is in the regulator and the Ministry of Finance at that time. So it was daunting. I realized I had heavy shoulders to shoulder on. At the same time, I also told myself that you have the woman agenda to carry on as well. So stay strong on that and live with it. So I used to tease myself and say, well, sometimes the best man for the job can be a woman. And I asked myself, does feminism go along with power, go along with authority? So I was accelerated, but at the same time, I was daunting as well. Thank you.
So there's no doubt that you had to steer RHB Bank during the Asia financial crisis in 1997. Could you share some of the key takeaways as a leader of an entrepreneur-owned bank during such an adverse time?
Actually, in the case of RHB Bank, I like to call it as a RHB story. I was actually in the trenches during the Asian financial crisis. For those of you young people out there, it happened in 1997 to 1998. And it was one of the most gloomiest part for Asia as a whole, actually. And the story of RHB Group and RHB Bank, of which I was very much involved at the bank level, is a story, in my mind, of one man's journey of meandering through the very difficult crisis, and was bold and courageous enough to build an empire in the region. And that man was Tan Sri Abdul Rashid Hussain, the founder and chairman of the RHB Group. RHB Bank was within RHB Group at that point of time. It is also a story, in my view, when I reflect on it, on the ground that in a crisis, with the central bank having quite a clear framework of resolution of the crisis at that time, coming up with a lot of new frameworks and new institutions, and how to save a distressed bank and to avoid systemic crisis. At that time, the distressed bank was UMBC Bank, Sign Bank, and how RHB took the opportunity to work together with the central bank at the same time to create ourselves a regional bank as well. Notwithstanding that, to be fair, we as a group at RHB had our own share of issues, because the Asian financial crisis hit a lot of banks, not just in Malaysia, but across the region. So I wanted to share a little bit of some of the statistics so that we can get a background of what this ecosystem is like. And then you can see how deep is a financial crisis. But I wanted to also share that this is a story of a man's ambition. I was on his right side. I was his right-hand man at the bank, implementing in his vision and believing in him. And he and the board gave me tremendous support. And that's, I think, how the story goes. But before we go into the state of RHB Bank, can I go to the GDP numbers first? The first page, the first one, yes. So at that time, in 1995, 1996 and onwards, you know, if you look at Malaysia's growth, we have been growing tremendously, average about 6.8% for 10 years. And at the peak of it, we were about 10% growth at every time. So it was a very, how shall I say, a very fast growth. Malaysia was going into exports, manufacturing. We have the first industrial master plan, and that's how this grew. And the incentives were very compelling. So there were a lot of Taiwanese, Korean, Japanese investors in the market. And that's how we grew from an agriculture-based economy to industrial-based economy with manufacturing as a key factor. So if I may go next to the slide of money supply. See, because of the growth, money supply was obviously growing at the same time. Receipts were coming in, but at the same time, there was also a bit slowing down of M3 velocity. Money supply was growing well, with economic growth about 8.9% over 7 years. FDI flows was there. We were actually the fourth in the world, you know, in terms of exports to GDP, of about in 1996 at about 120%. Loan growth. Next slide. Loan growth was growing very fast. Loan growth was about 25%. Today, the loan growth is only about 5 to 8%, or even less than that. So 25% loan growth. And in 1996 itself, the loan growth was about 33%. Deposit growth was slightly slower at about 22%. But invariably, if you look at the next page, I wanted to look at the slides here. Go to the slides on the loan deposit ratio. Yeah. Yes, so the loan deposit ratio is a factor of how you mobilize deposits. You use the deposits to grow loans. So you cannot have your loans growing too much faster than the deposits. But obviously, it's a portfolio mix. But over time, that we realized that the loan deposit ratio exceeding over 100% are signals that the system is tight. So at the average system, it was about over 100%. And I think in the case of RHB Bank, it was about 128%. Some of the banks were even much lower. So the banking system at that time, the LD ratio was rising up, but the banking system was very profitable. They were a darling of the investment analysis actually, because we have ROE of 20%, ROA of over 1.2%. Today, the ROE is much lower and the ROA is way below 1%. Price to book today over the world today is about 1 to 1.2 times. Those time price to book to anything from 2.3 to 3.5 times. So it went to as high as 3.5 times. The ringgit at that time was strong at a currency of about 2.5. Obviously, we saw at the crisis, it went down to as low as 4.48. Yeah. So there were clear signs of overheating. So if I may go back to the slide on where our international reserves were. Okay, maybe, sorry. You see, our international reserves, we grew in 1987 from a low agriculture. You see how we've grown the economy, and we've grown it tremendously. But at the same time, our reserves are also done well. You know how low our reserves was in 1987, and look at where we are today. So today we're about at $116 million in that sense, yeah. And it shows that the economy was growing. This slides I'm showing, the economy is growing very fast. Money velocity was growing fast. Loan growth was going fast. Deposit was going fast, a bit slower. International reserves was going up. The interest rates, yeah. So the exchange rate, you saw the exchange rate, this is showing during the crisis. And as a result of the crisis, our exchange rate dropped. But the interest rates at the peak of the crisis, next interest rates, please. Yes, this is the regional currency interest rates. Yeah, this shows the overnight interest rate. Now, this is interesting. It shows that right now, like we talk about, if inflation does go up, you saw the bond yields price moved up. And in the event there is a sudden shock, interest rate can move up very fast. Yeah. So this is an idea of how during crisis, how the interconnectivity of foreign exchange interest rates all come about. So against this backdrop, I like to zoom in on RHB Bank and Sime Bank. Sime Bank at that time, it was the old UMBC Bank. And Sime Darby Berhad saw the profitability of the banking system. So they decided to buy a bank. And lo and behold, it was unfortunately, it went right in smack a year later into the Asian financial crisis. And their CAR ratio, which is capital adequacy ratio of banks, which is a signal of how strong banks are, dropped from the minimum requirement is 8%, dropped to about 2.9%, meaning that they had to put in additional capital about 1.5 billion ringgit at that time. So soon after the RHB, at that time, the crisis, RHB also at that time just took over Kuang Yik Bank. And Kuang Yik Bank was a subsidiary of Malayan banking. It was a smaller bank, but they were doing the SME small. And at that time, they thought that it could be, you know, they have common borrowers, or they are big enough to grow on their own. They decided to offload the bank, and that's where RHB Bank bought it. When RHB bought Kuang Yik Bank, that was the first bank merger in the country. And we bought it at that time at 2.3 times book. And at that time, it was just a year before the crisis. So when I joined RHB Bank in 1994, 1996, I was the CEO. Tan Sri Rashid was thinking of scaling the bank. And we started with Kuang Yik Bank. And then the financial crisis came. And then the UMBC saga started. Yeah. So as I said, loan growth was fast. When I was in RHB Bank, my first priority as the deputy CEO was to build up deposits, because I saw that the loan deposit ratio was high. I was trained by an American banker to be conservative in managing the pricing of what we call asset and liability management. So it's very easy to grow assets. It's tougher to grow deposits, and it's tougher to grow retail deposits. And retail deposits, once you get it, they stick. Institutional deposits can go up and down because of pricing. So the way we calculate deposit ratio is on stable deposits in retail. So I focus on that as my primary support to the CEO then, so that when I took over the CEO-ship, I knew that I would feel much more comfortable to drive a bank at a loan-to-deposit ratio of below 100%. So by the time we reached into the crisis in June 1997, RHB Bank's loan-to-deposit ratio was already in the mid-80s. So we were already stable, and I felt comfortable. And at the same time, I also told myself we have to slow down our loan growth. So we targeted our loan growth to 15% to 20% versus the industry about 25%. Even then, I had a lot of pressure from, like group management. They want you to perform as a subsidiary. So you should grow, you should push your loan growth higher because the industry is at that level. But the board was very clear that I think we brought in a new CEO, and we know our own reality of capacity of liquidity. So we were comfortable with that new projections to slow down our growth. So that's where we were. And then suddenly, before I knew it, I was CEO of two banks. I was CEO of two banks because at that time, all the banks were thinking of just surviving. And I think Tan Sri Rashid, I've always been a person who works with the authorities and the governments to see how we can help the ecosystem. And that's how I came into the picture. So I was CEO of two banks concurrently for 18 months. Once I report to the board of RHB Bank, and the other one obviously to the board of UMBC, Siam Bank board, who were all industrialists, but they were very good, they were very supportive. So at the same time, I report to Central Bank on the day-to-day of Siam Bank. The agenda given to me was very clear. Get to stable proposition, avoid a bank run, and avoid a systemic crisis. So within 3 months, we got it back. And that was because I micromanaged the liability part of it. But I had a team of 3 people who were amazingly focused, who could see forward the data that is required for us to daily manage the liquidity of the bank. So together with the central bank, in 3 months, we brought it back to stable mode. But just as a sideline, a lot of people may not know, prior to RHB Bank coming to run Siam Bank at that time, there was ANZ Bank who was given an opportunity to look to see whether they wanted to take over Siam Bank. They spent 3 months there, and I think because it was at a crisis, it was tough for them to understand the local sensitivities. So they actually left to say that no, they would not do it, and that's how RHB Bank came. So after 18 months, to be fair to the system, they opened up for bidders, and because everybody was looking inward, there was only one bid, and that was RHB Bank. And by that time, we know the books of RHB Bank. We negotiated with Central Bank. They had done a model which had helped to capitalize Siam Bank as well, and RHB Bank in the merger. And then they had Dana Harta. Dana Harta is the distressed bank NPL where we lay it out. And so we sold the NPLs to Dana Harta. We had done a model to help us capitalize, and therefore we then merged the 2 banks. And you see this picture post-crisis of where before that the RHB Siam Bank. Yes, so you will see the state of RHB Bank and Siam Bank here. And then you see, if you look at where Maybank was, no, leave it there, please. And where you see Maybank is, then you see Siam Bank, RHB Bank. So you can see the size of the merger. Even then, Maybank was way ahead. But at least we came back to stable health of ROE of 20% and ROE of 10%. So then with Dana model actually issuing about 6.4%, of bonds to buy back the banking system NPLs. That's where post-crisis Bank Negara did a very good job and came up with rationalization of their institutions. They came up with a financial master plan, and the institutions was dropped to 42 from a peak of 89 institution commercial banks in 2006. And today it's about 26 commercial banks, of which the big banks are the domestic Malaysian banks. The smaller banks are actually the foreign banks. So today we've gone into COVID with a very resilient banking system. Thanks, Andrea.
No worries. So from RHB Bank, you then joined Hong Leong Bank in 2003, and 5 years later, the global financial crisis happened. Essentially, what are the key takeaways that you could tell us about during your time with Hong Leong during that time?
Hong Leong Bank was a very different story. Hong Leong Bank was a story of a good bank, very conservative in its own ways, strong fundamentals, and wanted to scale the market. When I went into Hong Leong Bank in late 2003, I assumed the CEO in late 2003, going into 2004. There was already a group of good management who were very entrenched with the Chinese business community. So I was seen as probably quite an outlier to be in the Hong Leong Bank group. But clearly they wanted to scale. I would be very honest that I struggled in the first 18 months to move the needle on an organic basis. It was very incremental growth. The ratios continued to be strong. But over time, we realized that we need to invest in certain optics and fundamentals to really move the needle. So it was a question of how to bring in talent at the kind of compensation that most of the domestic banks were not used to. And we were lucky that I had a president that came in from Citibank who had the same mindset that we need to pay, but we need to also come up with a much more stretched KPIs, performance, to be able to convince the board and the chairman of how to spend more before we can earn. So we were able to convince that. But what was good about the group, that we have a very dedicated chairman and the board who has a very group 21st century Hong Leong plan. They are very clear between banking to manufacturing to real estate what their plan in 21st century is. It's about their own industrial master plan, how to have the right people to make the difference, and how to really stretch yourself for high performance. That part of high performance leadership is, if you're in the group working very closely with the chairman, Tan Sri Kwek Lang Chan, it's amazing to have that privilege. And with at his right hand side for 10 years, 6 years with RHB Tan Sri Rashid, I have the best of entrepreneurship during good and bad times, and how to see and understand value propositions, how to understand what high performance is all about. That was, to me, very privileged to work with these two entrepreneurs and high performance, and wise men. So after building the trust and building a team with us, we started looking at inorganic opportunities. In the case of AEON Bank, it was the second time we got it right. It was the right time when their shareholders were having their own issues. We came in at the right time, and we did the merger very fast. In 100 days, we actually integrated it. And we got it at a price that we were able to create value. So in 2000, and that happened in 2011. And in between, we did some small greenfields. We acquired a bank, 20%, first Asian bank to acquire 20% in a Chinese bank. And that has been very, very successful. Today, it's given Hong Leong Bank its continued progress, its value, and it has got listed in Hong Kong after I left. And it's still doing very well. And the way China is going it, they will give tremendous value to Hong Leong Bank. At the same time, I got some greenfield licenses for Hong Leong Bank at that time. We got 100% subsidiary in Vietnam, 100% subsidiary in Cambodia, And with that, I think Hong Leong Bank today has got a regional footprint. The philosophy of the stakeholders and the Hong Leong ownership always has been intact. They are always very true north in the way they go about their businesses. So CEOs are professionals that work with them, that align with their thinking and the mindset and executing with them well. So obviously the journey goes for Hong Leong Bank. The success stories is very evident in the way they stand up preeminent. The same as you can see, the story for RHB Bank goes and they continue to be successful, highly successful in the region as well. So that's the story of Hong Leong Bank. It's about execution, working together with a very clear plan and using inorganic growth. Thank you. Much different from an RHB story.
Yeah, it's quite evident that it's a very compelling difference. Story
Yes.
at the same time. So we know that you are passionate about education, especially as a tool of empowerment to reduce the income inequality and to improve socioeconomic mobility. We also know that you are very energetic, full of life, and often surrounded by millennials and Gen Z. As you're being entrusted with the trustee role for Teach for Malaysia, can you share with us about your passion for education and the youth, as well as your involvement in the organization?
You see, when I left active, I always say when I left active P&L accountability, I was thinking which NGO that I would be keen in, that I can align my passion with. I can't go into an NGO where, where your heart and your compass is not aligned. So when Teach for Malaysia reached out for me, it was just perfect. At that time, I think Tan Sri Jamila reached out to me and said, Yvonne, we want you to come on board. And I think you can play, like all of us have different values to bring to the table. Education for me was always something where my dad was quite clear in it. He always says that education will empower you to live your own life, to develop your own critical thinking, and so that you can be discerning in the decisions, as well as you develop a moral compass. When I saw that my dad, in his Chinaman ways, hired an English tutor to learn English because he was doing business and trying to hobnob with the businessmen and royalty, I realized that the fact that he was willing to hire an English teacher at those days, how disciplined he was in wanting to enhance his knowledge. So, and I always believe that education can actually move generations. Actually, in Malaysia, with education and the opportunities we have, people have moved the generations, the power of their wealth in one generation. In other countries, it could be much longer because there's so much more ahead in their maturity. So what Teach for Malaysia, I was actually amazed by the young people. They were so passionate. They're all very highly educated. They're from Cambridge, from Wharton, but they have a passion for education. They wanted to use education as their foundation to enhance and empower equal access and equal opportunity. And when you listen to them, they're so smart. First-class graduates living in rented rooms just to go to smaller towns to do their passion. It really gave me more energy. That this is the group of people that I wanted to support. So I'm enjoying my stint there. It is actually a leadership journey in Teach for Malaysia. It's a part of the Teach for All and Teach for America, where you develop a 2-year leadership journey. We don't give you any incentives. You figure out how to be a leader, and we want the outcomes. And that's what the true leadership is. And I was very impressed with them. I really enjoy working with them. Whatever I can do, I will spend time with them. So my value there would be helping them to say, now we've reached a certain scale, how to make sure that we have enough governance to stand up to our donors, to stand up to the outcomes that we promise, and at the same time building value proposition and nurturing up the succession plan. And that's where I also do some unofficial and mentorship at the same time. Yes, I do really enjoy it. So for you all out there, if you have $1 to spend, it's a tax-exempt company, from $1 to $100, you want to give us some donation, we welcome. Thank you very much.
So before we end this part of the segment, what would your parting words be for the audience?
Oh, my parting words that I would love to do is this. For you young girls out there and for you women out there, the last 10 years, the opportunities has opened up for women agenda. So go out there and grab your future. I believe the world is now open up to listen to us, to know that the merit that they're looking for can be found in a woman as well. So enhance your knowledge, open up your network, keep an open attitude, and keep an open attitude that you want to learn and you're not right all the time, and respect other people's diverse talent. We have an opportunity to really move up the ladder. And when you move up the ladder, know yourselves and know your own strengths. Live within what you think your capacity, and balance what I understand as between authority and power and your role in society. I have been fortunate that I have been grounded because I think of your, you know that you can fall sometimes, and having seen that in your younger days, you are always grounded. So I've always been grounded by understanding what cash flow is, not acquiring assets per se. So if you have assets, you don't have cash flow, many companies fall because of that, individuals fall because of that. So stay true to understanding what are your own fundamentals, what you can and cannot digest, and do what is right for yourselves and your family and for your career and for the society and the organization that you are in. Because I think over time we make mistakes, but you must be able to come back. And if you live within that circle of knowing what you can digest, your mistakes won't be that bad. So in that sense, you can start your life journey again.
Thank you so much for that advice, Dato'. I'm sure it's such a compelling advice for many women out there, and anyone really, and anyone who's looking to be a leader or lead in their own lives, even taking control as well. So ladies and gentlemen, we have now arrived at the Q&A segment of this brown bag. Yvonne, if it's all right with you, we have some questions that have come in from the audience. So to kick off this part of this segment, I will first start off with a question that's come in, an anonymous question that has come in that says, "Hi Dato', in your leadership and career journey, did you consider visibility and engagement with the authorities, media, and public important?"
Oh, yes. I think part of building your persona or your own brand comes with two things first. First, you have to figure out what your strengths are, what your fundamentals are. And when you're ready, you can probably do a lot more networking and go and speak at seminars, get involved and get into the kind of network associations. But fundamentally, you have to know what are your own strengths first. Otherwise, as you say, there's substance and there's form. And you must also know when is the right timing to do that. I would say that, building your persona, building your network is important. You may be very smart, Andrea, but we do not know about you. Unless somebody who have worked with you and say, I heard about Andrea. But if you have, say, in the case of when I was named as the CEO, that's a good question. I look back. When the market talk, they say, I want Yvonne Chia is being nominated as an RHB Bank CEO. The market knew of me already, knew of me through my days in Bank of America, when I worked with the government, when I worked with my peer banks, the domestic banks. I know of situations where when some names have been brought up for CEO, the people that matters have not heard of the individual. So it does matter that at a certain level of seniority, you need to build that persona for yourself in the marketplace, that in your peer group, that people can give reference to you. Yeah, that matters.
By the way, this question comes in from this question I just asked is from Datin Linda Yang, who was the former MD of the Star Media Group. So the next question comes in from Muhammad Shafiq Dawood, who would like, if I could invite to ask their question directly to Yvonne. Muhammad Shafiq. Hi. You can
Hi, Datuk. Is it clear? I'm sorry, I'm actually outside, so this is actually quite so I can't miss this for the world lah. Okay, so Datuk, I actually not in the banking industry, but I'm just wondering if you can have any advice for the young people who are starting out in the banking industry, because I have friends in the banking industry and they always say that the banking industry is tough, and how do you maybe you can impart some advice to us all. How do you start with your career, and what is your advice in general? Thank you.
See, many years ago when I started banking, it was a much more, it was less complex than today. Today, the banking industry is very complex because there's a lot more compliance that needs to be done. The compliance, we have the anti-money laundering, anti-terrorism, we have conflicts of management, conflicts of interest, we have got specific sector lending, we've got what we call as more intellectual lending as well in terms of IPs and all. So if you say you wanted to start to banking per se, it's like any career today, we all started with no idea what banking was. What we had was fundamentally what we call is the right attitude of wanting to learn. So if I have a general degree, whether be it in banking, whether it be in business management, in psychology or in economics, I can enter banking. And that's where the starting begins. But what we need to have is basic knowledge of, if you have accounting knowledge, that helps. But the basic knowledge of business does help as well, business banking. But you actually start from scratch. You can be a history graduate, you can still go there because banks normally provide training, and banking is basically a very simple industry. We collect deposits from the market and we give out loans, but in the process of that, we give out loans is for the economy to grow. So a sum of all those banks will help grow the economy. So what's the role of the central bank? The role of the central bank is to make sure the banks grow well and there is financial and monetary stability. So along the lines, in banking, you will learn a combination of accounting, of business management, and cash flow, and how people grow revenue, and how people collect at the same time. So you learn from your customers and you learn from the banking itself, and that's how we hone our skills. So there is no specific direct discipline that can say that just because you have a banking degree, it will make you a better banker. You have to go through the mill. Yeah. But credit is very fundamental. So what is credit? Credit is the understanding of accounting, understanding of cash flow, understanding of the discipline, of understanding what companies use leverage to grow their businesses, how we use augmented with equity, and how operations leverage works. That itself is a fundamental of banking. That one you have to learn when you come in.
Beautiful. That's great. So we have another question that has come in from a PEMANDU alumni who would like to ask you a question directly. If I could invite Mindy to directly ask the question to Yvonne. Hello, Mindy.
Sorry.
Appears that Mindy is not online, so I'll read out the question on their behalf. They ask, "Hi Dato, thank you for always sharing your knowledge and positivity. What are your thoughts on cryptocurrency and the rise of decentralized finance? How will this affect the financial industry in the next decade?
A good question. There's one philosophy I would say is, while we get involved with what's in a fast-changing world of finance, one key thing that I guide myself is, if I don't know enough, do you invest in it yet? So build your knowledge. Even for me, I'm still trying to understand it better. It's a very complex subject. When we talk about blockchain, where Bitcoin and cryptocurrency is based on, and then there is more authenticating. But the question is, at the moment, if you use it as a form of currency, it'll be tough. But there are obviously very heavy adoption there. I would say, let's wait a while and study a bit more how the regulators are going to manage that. But in the meantime, some people have taken some short-term pundits and make money, but only brave people will do among the young, but among the more sophisticated, they know what they are doing, and they also know when to get out.
Yeah.
So yes, I think, will it change the banking system per se? Too early to say, but let's wait and see the development. Yeah.
Exciting time. So the next question comes in from an anonymous person in the audience. They note, and they're basically saying, Dear Dato', as the first woman CEO in banking, what are your advice to the ladies who would like to follow in your footsteps?
I think those days are changing, I must say. I think certain leadership styles, certain business models, certain legacy systems, the way we approach talent, the way we approach the kind of returns that we want are changing. It's even changing even faster in this post-COVID world. And especially with this post-COVID world, there are preferences by society and the community. They want to look more for a lot more contribution from the companies, also from the government. So I would say that if you are looking for a career to just focus on a linear program to be a CEO, maybe those days are getting less. I think we can plan our careers, but it can never be a linear plan. It was a bit more linear before, but the way of the VUCA world, it's unlikely. So I would say that within the young millennials today, for the young women, you would create your own spheres of influence. Look at some of the new startups today. Look at some of the new social enterprise today. I'm amazed at some of them who have actually are so impactful. Yeah, they're the CEO in their small little outfit, creating a lot of influence, and within very relevant to what society is looking for. If you look at the Teach for All conference that I attended recently, and you look at these very passionate young girls and men creating their own impact. So you can be a CEO of your own outfit and create your own space and influence. But if you want to work, say, I want to start as a middle management and then move to a CEO of a bank, of an investment bank, that journey can be very, will be quite volatile now relative to the more linear people. So create your own influence, your own CEO, and your own impact, and you can be more impactful. Because the old school is also changing. Yeah.
So we have another question that we'd like to invite one of the audience to ask you directly. That's all right. I'd like to invite Amir Isham to ask Yvonne directly their question.
Hello, hi Dato'. Nice to see you again. We engaged before, I think, in the 30% agenda previously. My question, Dato', I think here in Malaysia, traditionally, we always would say banking and oil and gas are your leading employers. They pay the best benefits, they pay the best pay. Do you think that this is still true today? because especially with the rise of technology, and you rightly pointed out crypto as well, I think was one of the questions, Shopee and all these e-commerce sites coming up. Do you think, in your opinion, it is still true? And what does this then mean for banking as a whole? As you said, it's also now more complex.
Yeah. Let me answer it this way. I would think today, the kind of talent that employers are looking at are changing. And when I sit down and talk to a young person today, I will always Google jobs that are being hired. And the jobs that are being hired today are data scientists, data design, data technologies, cybersecurity, digital advertising. So by looking forward, for a young person, you have to ask yourselves, the skills going forward is how do I prepare myself so I have a future ahead of me. So beyond your education today, we need to augment ourselves with these skills. So it's never too late if we already have a degree in mid-management to switch some of these skills. At the same time, if some of us have our children says, I don't want to go to a general degree, I want to do a diploma, or I want to do like what I just saw the other day, there was a convocation ceremony where I saw the chairman of GA, Tunku Abidin, giving a speech together with the Khazanah people, where they had a pool of funds to retrain people into the new coding skills, and they had a 6 months and 6 weeks program that allowed people to be re-employed. So those are the kind of things happening. So today, if your children says, I do not want to go to a degree that I'm not sure will give me the skills to have a role, they wanted to go into those type of STEM skills and the coding skills, I think we should encourage that. So that's the kind of skills that's happening. So are we then saying that everybody have to do coding? Not necessary. Because in future, I think AI would take over a lot of bank jobs, a lot of oil and gas jobs, those that are automated. So what type of skills do we need the human being to have? It's actually design thinking, creative thinking, decision making, managing young talent that are not easy to manage, the young millennials, technologies and creativity, how you put them together. So what type of skills? I can't give you a real answer, but I think it's about maneuvering and navigating, respecting young talent. And that's where the new millennials will be. And they will demand good pay. I think the people who get very well paid today are people in technology, people in media, people in digital advertising, people who are creative in design thinking, data scientists. So those are people that we really have to retain. Obviously, we need to have management as well, but this will be the kind of career that's going to happen. These people will earn more than a CEO. I mean, I'm telling you, it's already happening.
Yeah. Thank you, Datuk.
Yeah. Thank you, Amir.
So the credit specialists, the technology specialists, the liability specialists in banks will earn a lot. And they can be very specific in their own skill set and quite comfortable in their job relative to the general worker or the general business management. Unless, as I said, you have strong leadership traits. Thank you.
Thank you, Amir, for your question. Thank you, Datuk, for that. It's true that you can't really see a shift in work culture these days as well. We have another question that has come in from Datuk Murang, Chairman of Portrayed Malaysia. He notes a very enlightening journey, Datuk Yvonne. Thank you for your sharing. My question, in the many financial crises that happened in your time in the few banks that you said, can you share with us one or two most challenging and breaking moments when you felt your true north vision was unattainable? And what did you do? Was it taking a side path and later to rejoin the journey, or was it a recalibration of your true north?
I was actually, if you ask me through my banking journey, which is the journey that I enjoyed, really in the trenches was during the Sign Bank days of where I really was in the trenches. Of course, I do have defining moments that did give me some reflective moments. But because I'm by nature a person who believe in having a true, honest dialogue, and I will open up my stress or share with you my concerns, it was easy for me to be able to be guided to do what is right. Yeah. So when we have a good board who believes that we need to do the right thing for the organization, and I have both good boards, both RHB and Sandbank. My moments were more in terms of where certain, probably during the Sandbank days, as we go through the difficulties of dealing with borrowers who also could be caught, there were moments whereby we do have references to higher ups and all that, but I was guided by the facts. And what I was smart about it was having a strong credit team to give me the possibilities that I could work with. And that guided the process. And that, I think, is very important for the true north. You must deal with facts, and then you tell yourself the facts are very clear. We can move a bit of the needle, but the needle can move in a way that it does not destroy the organization. So we need to mitigate, and we need to find a win-win, because some big customers can also bring our own downfall. So how we balance that? So I would say that I was very open about what can and cannot be done. And then we settled somewhere where the organization is kept safe.
Thank you so much, and thank you so much, Datuk Ose, for your question. So we have another question that's come in from Faris Imran that they say, good morning, Datuk Yvonne. From your working career, you have met two great persons who I am sure you consider to be mentors. In your opinion, how did you find a mentor that could lead you on the right path in your career, and how would you recognize it?
Over the years, as you say, you meet a lot of people, from customers to the community leaders, as well as to your stakeholders. Because I work closely with the stakeholders, I know their values, and obviously we have to be aligned. Otherwise, you can't work in the chemistry. It's not. So if you look at outside, I had the opportunity of meeting a lot of people from the international arena, and whether it's women or men, and I pick up a lot of their good strengths and a lot of their hubris as well, and tell myself I won't try to go there as well. So over time I develop it. I wouldn't say I do have a specific mentor, but I do look for certain qualities. For example, I must say that in today's world, that's why I said, don't just look at the past, look at the forward. When you walk into a seminar today, there's a lot of young girls and young boys there. And they're all dressed up in their own unique way, right? Colored hair, they will have their own style of being unique. But don't underestimate that when they speak. I remember there was a seminar in New York, I was there. This girl walked in, and there was a group of guys there was like teasing her, when she walked in, not knowing that she is one main speaker, which I knew because I had done my homework to see who are the women leaders there. So they were, I think she had some of a pink and a lavender hair, and she was wearing quite a short skirt or something. But that shows today, in today's world, you have to look at substance and not how people attire. But when she spoke, it was so powerful. The content was so good. These guys, actually, I told them, you better go and say hello to her, and which they did. So yes, it's important to substance over that. It's a different world now.
Substance over glamour.
Yeah.
So thank you so much, Dato', and thank you so much, Faris, for your question. So another question from the audience. They said, I think your story is one that is very inspiring. As someone leading an organization and being a male, how would you recommend encouraging diversity without turning it into a quota system? And what kind of incentives could be put into place that would encourage the diversity fairly?
Yeah. Actually, in some ways, I did enjoy my stint, being the only woman in the room, I have to say. So obviously, actually in the banking sector at that time, the chairman of the Association of Banks was Datuk Amir Sham, but he was always making me feeling very comfortable. And I was very comfortable in my boardroom because I know they were there. In many ways, you have to walk into a room with substance, because unfortunately, I must say the old boys network would probably make you feel a little bit that you have to prove yourself a bit. So yes, we have to work 2-3 times harder, get your substance with me, and speak with a firm assertion in that sense. I was pretty assertive when I need to be. But I was very clear that I would go in with substance. Yeah. So for all of us today, what I would ask is, we as women, we are only asking for opportunities. Just open up the opportunities for us. Because today there are so many credible women, so many credible young ladies who just needed to be given an opportunity. I was lucky to be given an opportunity by a man. So today, whether you're man or woman, if a candidate is good, and if it happens to be a women candidate, everything being equal, it would be nice for us to be given that opportunity. And once opportunities are given, to be fair, if you look at it today, we are now close to 26, 27 or 29% of women on boards. But when I was running RHB Bank and Hong Leong Bank, without realizing it, I had surrounded my people that really matters, my high performers. In RHB, at least 40% were women. And in Hong Leong Bank, I was reminded that too many women are at your C-suite, but they were performing, they were capable. And if you look at merit per se, invariably you hire them without realizing that you were not even thinking about the gender. So I think I want to remind all of us that while opportunities open up, we arrive on merit and merit alone. And that's where we want to be counted. Don't take us other than that. And I know the women today arrive on merit. Just give us an opportunity. And obviously when we are there, fellow women, let's continue to pursue it by performing well, so that the next batch of women can come in, the next batch of young ladies will come in. And before we know it, I think the world is about what is merit. It's not just about women, it's about also diversity of underprivileged, diversity of people who have no opportunities as well. So then the diversity agenda will move slightly different already.
So does that mean essentially that the position itself is also the incentive already for women to sort of the position of leadership itself should be already incentive enough for women to come to these spaces anyway?
Yeah,
right.
That's right.
Well, thank you so much for the answer. And to the person who gave the question from the audience. So we have another question from Abrar Anwar, the MD and CEO of Standard Chartered Bank of Malaysia. They said, Datuk Yvonne, good morning. Thanks for your insights. You have seen a lot of crises in your long and illustrious banking career, including the Asian crisis and financial market meltdown in 2008. Would you consider the COVID-19 pandemic that impacted the world as the biggest crisis facing the financial sector? If so, what are the key differences you see this time around?
Yeah.
Best regards.
Yes, that's a good question. I would say if I were to compare, let's say, the Asian financial crisis, the 2008 crisis, in between there were minor crises. The COVID crisis is actually the biggest crisis because it impacts across the globe. In the case of AFC, the impact was a lot more in ASEAN. In the case of the 2008 crisis, it was more of the global banks and the US mortgage. And Asia was more on part of the trade credit was affected. But in the case of COVID, it has impacted across all sectors, all society, and some of the shocks that are in today are going to be permanent. And we really do not know what are the long permanent scarring. At the same time, how economies recover will be quite unequal because, as you can say, the inequity of vaccination, inequity of protecting yourself. And now with the next variant coming in, the pain of recovery, which we thought we are just about to start, may be continued to hamper. So the story out there is going to be quite different. Lifestyles, working forward in the future will change. Where do we actually support the standards of living we have today? It's going to be interesting because let's take example of real estate value. A lot of us today have borrowed on real estate, and whether it's commercial or residential. And when you looked at it, that if we would start working from home, those values will be affected. How does that affect the individual payment capacity, individual work creation? So work creation will actually, as you said, it's no more linear that we thought, oh, if I go this, I earn this interest rate, this, I will get that. It will be quite different. So the role of government has increased. Government debt throughout all over the world has increased. Support and subsidies to the public has increased. How do then bring this debt over time to a certain comfort fiscal level? How do we address the income divide? Those are real issues. So yes, Abra, I agree with you. It is actually bigger than the other two crises because those were targeted.
Yeah. I haven't seen it that way before. That's a very good insight. Thank you so much. And thank you so much, Abra, for your question as well. So we have another anonymous question. They note that leaders make.
Sorry.
No worries. So someone in the audience is saying that leaders make good and sorry. So leaders make good and not so good decisions throughout their career. Is there any decision that you've made in the past that you regretted and wished you could go back in time and make a different decision?
Oh yes, there were many occasions, but those could be easily mitigated if they are business decisions. Maybe in an acquisition, there was one potential acquisition very early when I first joined Hong Kong in less than 6 months at that time. And when I look back, if I could have just pushed the price a bit, we would have got that acquisition. So, you learn to walk away, just over a small percentage price. But if you ask me, I would say it would be in one or two situations whereby we could have let go of some of the difficult people that were not team player, but who were pretty good performers and were creating a lot of issues to the organization. So if your lessons learned is that nobody is indispensable. Because if you have a good bench strength, when the leader becomes difficult, maybe it's better to let them go instead of. So I could have done them earlier, maybe. If there's one thing I also would say, it has to do with, I like any leader, we do make use of good people, but sometimes when you leverage on their expertise and they get into their head, they become hubris, they are the most highest contribution to the company, and they start playing difficulty with management. There's a time when you call it that enough is enough. So those are lessons learned, whereby I maybe would have called the shots earlier, but in the end we did it, so it was never detrimental. And then you realize, my God, there's a new silver lining. The new guy that came in actually did better, and actually, what do you call that? Created a fantastic teamwork. Because when you go into an organization, you try not to disturb some of the old boys or old girls network in the system. But that's a lesson learned. But today, I think it's much easier, because people know that jobs are very much more pricier, as well as being, especially on certain skill sets. Yeah.
So we have one last audience question for both you, Datuk Yvonne, and Datuk Sri Idris. They asked both of you, what is your favorite book or film that has had a profound impact on your life? Which let's go first.
The latest book, I would say, the latest book that I'm reading is for Winners Take All. And this book, I think, does open up the mind of every one of us, that the way society is moving, the way the elitist society is moving, and especially as the rich grows richer because of the easy money worldwide, technically they are controlling the world. And it tells us, how do we survive in that kind of environment? I'm reading that book, and I think everybody should read it. It gives you a sense of where the world is going, and without realizing it, we are actually under that environment.
Yeah, the book that has really profound impact on me is a book by Tracy Goss. It's called The Last Word on Power. Everything that I have learned and I tried to apply in my work, it's all stemmed from that influence. Because that lady has this idea, in order to do the game of the impossible, you must accept the fact that you could lose. Vulnerability is a virtue. So you die before the fight, almost like the samurai fighter. And if you already got nothing to lose, you're going to win because of the fact that you're going to put everything there, your whole mind, your heart and soul is focused on that work. And so Tracy Goss is, I've never met the lady, but I must have read this book more than a dozen times. And I'm still a student of the book. And for light touch, I've been watching on, some of you may have watched it, Ted Lasso. It's a very entertaining series, mini-series. But the book that really, a film that really caused me to think was a documentary called The Men Who Built America. So a lot of theories about how America grew to where it is today. But when you really look at those, a dozen men who did all those things, like the rail and the gas pipelines and the whole of that, there's nothing patriotic about what they were doing. It's all about self, if you like, about greed. But all of that has a positive impact on society. So when you think about it, all the theories about how America grew to where it is today, the fact of the matter is that those dozen people who did all those fantastic things, they were not doing it for altruistic and nationalistic reasons. But really, it tells you a lot about what people interpret to be the ingredient of success of a country, what actually happens on the ground. Necessarily two different things. It's called The Men Who Built America.
Oh, I have
Yeah.
to read all 3 books. That sounds so good.
Yeah.
I'll add it to my list. So thank you so much for answering the question. Before we invite Datuk Sri Idris to give his closing remarks, we would like to ask you both of you, how do you see the world post-COVID in the near future, specifically for Malaysia?
Me first? Yeah, I think the world is evolving very fast. So as we said, the technology changes, the new norms, and what's happening. Even as we speak today, how do you call that? The Omicron variant is how it pans out is still yet to be known. If you look at where the US is going today, it obviously has ambitions to want to reinvest again. Yeah? At the same time, while it is trying to reinvest again, the stock markets there are at an all-time high, even though it's some dips, but it's still way high above. And 2 days ago, the fear of inflation has seen the bond prices changing, the bond yields changing, and bond prices changing. So the fear of inflation because of the COVID short supply are real now. If you look to Europe and UK, coming out, but infection rates are also going up. But where we are in this part of the world is China. China's growth has been phenomenal. And China today probably is about 50 to 70% of the supply chain of the world. It continues to grow a bit slower. And what is interesting about China is that, in fact, yesterday, President Xi has just launched the Green Plan for China. And when you read the Green Plan together, it would exceed the kind of Green Plan's expenditure that Europe and US put together. So China knows that it has to move into the world with a sustainable future. So is the rest of the world. But I think because of the way the form of government is in China, they're able to get things done and executed the way they want it. And the likelihood of China being the most dominant economy in the world is very real. So where does ASEAN and the rest of Asia fit in? I think ASEAN in particular is going to benefit a lot, especially Indonesia and Vietnam. And if you looked at where countries are coming in FDIs to spread their diversified bases, ASEAN is the next base out of China. So China is also in the process, the technology innovation and the digitalization is unbelievable. If you go to China today, you're in a different world. So when the skeptics talk about China, they have not been to China to see how the bullet train works or how the digital payment systems work. And so ASEAN, Indonesia, 87% of private equity money this year went to ASEAN. And there's a lot more went to Indonesia out of the ASEAN. Malaysia has received part of it. So next one was Vietnam and so was Singapore. So Indonesia, because of its population, and as you can see yesterday, the Grab listing itself tells you the potential in Indonesia, that money is coming to Southeast Asia. So what portion of the money, hopefully, that we can get out of it? So we just have our 12th Malaysia plan to announce. It is obviously a committed plan by the government, very clear with improving our GNI to $10,000, as well as increasing our GNP and with a focus on talent, with a focus on technology. So the government has come up with plans on the digitalization of the country as well, the startup community in a big way. We are moving a lot of talent and innovation there. But what is probably that we have to be mindful also is that we have to learn to live with slower growth, not like what we saw in those days. We have to learn to live that we have to slowly unwind some of the fiscal deficit as well as the government support. So how do we go about that? The only thing I could say is that, you know, our plans are there. The important thing is how we go about evaluating and monitoring and policy impact. And most important thing is the execution, the measurement so that we get the right impacts. So all the way, whether you're in the private sector, you're in the government, your execution plan is important. You see, in Malaysia in particular, because we are a resource-based country, while we are recovering from COVID, you know what else we have to do? We have to transition to ESG practices. So for the oil and gas, the plantation companies, the steel companies, the manufacturing companies, all have to transition to ESG compliant. So in the process of trying to build back what you were good at before, you have to also change the business model. You have to change your sources of raw materials and supply. You have to get your practices compliant so that investors want to come in to invest with. So for Malaysia, it's very critical that as we try to grow back to what we were good at, we need to also be ESG compliant. So if you look at the survey of the investment houses, you look at the survey of the consumers today, anything from 45 to 67% of them says they will only invest in ESG companies and ESG countries that are coordinated in their ESG practices. So the government has to coordinate that program all the way from the government to the private sector. So it is also a massive execution plan. And when I read recently that the multinationals are saying that 70% of the ESG requirements are dependent on their supply chain. So the supply chain in Malaysia, in China, in Vietnam, in Indonesia, all have to comply. So they're very dependent, and some of them are helping the process. So in short, I think it's the execution. The execution story will make the impact. That's the difference, and we cannot afford any major mistakes. We cannot afford any wastages or leakages. Those days of having to say, oh, I can get success 40% to get impact may be tougher now because the cost of businesses have gone up post-COVID because of the supply shock. Thanks, Andrea.
Thank you so much. That's Sri?
Yeah, the post-pandemic, the recovery for the world. I think there are three key lessons learned. One, the whole world needs a new economic model. Even prior to the crisis, already so many countries, governments have heavy duty debt. Japan was 226% government debt as percentage of GDP, and the US is more than 100. Even in Singapore, it's more than 100%. That was prior to COVID-19. Now, as a result of government having to put a lot of money, the debt level has increased to a level that's untenable. So if you look today, majority of the countries that reach high income status, they followed the road most traveled. That means they borrow a lot of money to pump into the economy to grow, to have that kind of growth. So the world has to rediscover a new economic model. That's one. And I think the shock that was put into the global system is forcing everyone to re-examine what is that new model. We already know very few countries that have found a different way of doing, the Scandinavian countries. They've grown to high income status without accumulating the kind of unsustainable debt. That's one. The second lesson learned, businesses. Businesses have become a lot more globalized today, even more so during the pandemic because of the e-commerce platform. I don't think that's going to go away today. The malls have to re-examine. People can sell their items and their product and reach any market in the world without having a retail store. So that the transformation of businesses in the digital platform is absolutely key. And that is a new aspect of businesses, that the transformation of businesses to embrace digital transformation is critical. The third one is on personal, the new way of working. And in my time, in Yvonne's time, I was in oil and gas for 23 years. Today, you cannot expect young people to stick around and do the same job in the same company for that long. So the churn is quite high.
Yeah.
So a lot of people have to now make work more meaningful and more challenging, because otherwise they take the bike and move on. So that's a lesson learned for people. The gig economy is there. People will find that the loyalty is not like it used to be. And so I think that area of the personal aspect of jobs and the new way of working is a big area for people to look at today. So those are the three take points for me.
Incredible. Thank you so much to Datuk Yvonne, Dr. Sri Idris, for your answer. We've now arrived towards the end of our session. I'd like to invite Dr. Sri Idris to give his closing remarks.
And first of all, Yvonne, thank you so much for coming to join us on this Saturday, giving so much of your very rich experience. And my final few takeaways for me is, number one, when you listen to Yvonne, it was very clear he had a clear, big picture about managing business. She understood what the economy was going through, the money velocity and the growth levels. And she was looking at the outside perspective. So if you want to be a successful transformational leader, follow what Yvonne is doing. You must have a clear picture about the external environment. If looking at your small pond in your businesses, you look at you don't see the signal from outside, you cannot connect, then you cannot be successful. So that clarity about the business environment is critical. She spent a long time showing the charts about the growth, the GDP growth, the rising debt level, etc., the loan growth for the whole country rather than just RHB Bank and etc. So that is very important. The second thing that I've learned from her is that while you're very clear about the outside perspective, you must know the inside out of your business. And if you listen to her, she was very clear about the key signals of what you should avoid in running a bank, what you should not avoid. By the way, I'm co-chairman of Sunway. In Sunway, we look at 3 companies that we want to learn from, and they all happen to begin with the letter H. Hong Leong, we said we will learn from Hong Leong from M&A, mergers and acquisition. It was very clear from your story, but you were clear about what you wanted to do. In fact, I think one of your sessions, you talked about how you integrated a bank within 100 days. Which bank was it again?
Yon Bank.
Yon Bank. That's actually phenomenal. Many people can acquire, but they don't know how to integrate. So the other 2 H was, we also want to learn from Hatalega. They didn't grow from M&A, but they grow from innovation.
Yes.
And the other H is we want to learn from Hapseng. Because Hapseng grew their businesses more from an operational perspective. So we're learning from many different H. So a lot of what you're doing, you don't know that we're learning from Hong Leong. I mean, we picked up. The other thing that I learned from you was that you got to learn from the very best. You had, fortunately, you had mentors like Tan Sri Rashid Hussain. You had been working with Kwek Leng Chan, Tan Sri Kwek Leng Chan, and you read a lot, and you needed to make sure that you learn from so many people. It's a collection of what you learn and influence from others. You said that career is not as linear as it used to be. There's a lot of disruptions into it. So the young people bear that in mind. It's very, very important. And it was one question that was posed about, I can't remember what precisely it was. How about these new things that you're not familiar? And you were very clear, you must learn first before jumping into it. So you better learn and really don't jump into something that's new. You're completely, because you're seduced by the idea, you jump into it without knowing. to study and learn from it. Since I also know Yvonne, she will, from her mannerism, I know she was on the board of PEMANDU. And it's very important in transformational leadership to be assertive, particularly when you're women in a relatively large boys or men's network. And you have to be very assertive in about, not aggressive, but assert your points. And she's very clear about what she wants. And so a lot of those points learned, it was very clear in many of the things that you are talking about today. Those lessons learned are very, very clear. And I also picked from you this point about luck is the end product of hard work and smart work. And that's a new thing that I'm going to put in my vocabulary, because most people think that luck is something that it comes out, but you say it's end product. I think to a certain extent it's true.
Yeah, because I think when the opportunity comes,
Yeah,
there's luck,
there's
but you are prepared for
You have
it.
to prepare to, you have to,
Yes.
absolutely. So there's a lot of things that I picked out from you in terms of your passion for education. I salute you for doing that. You know, it's completely non-banking related, but you really went into it because, you know, it's so impactful for society, the Teach for Malaysia. And I actually went on to one day I became a teacher in a school in Kajang under the TFM. It's so incredible, and what I saw there. So thank you so much, Yvonne. We learned so much from it. I mean, there are so many things, nuggets of things that were the ones I talked about were the highlights, the things that I learned and picked from the very short session. Thank you very much for taking the time.
Thank you. Thank you. It's good to share.
Thank you.
Thank you.